zero in on what Michael said, and which is really the fundamental argument against raising the minimum wage. And namely, it is that if you raise the minimum wage too high, it is a disincentive to hiring and actually is an incentive to let people go, to automate workplaces. So, Heather, you had a response to that.
Yeah, I mean, that has been for a long time what the economics textbooks have said. But we have actually seen in places where they have raised the minimum wage, no adverse employment effects. And the idea behind it is, well, these employers can't afford it. If they could afford it, they would have done it already. But a couple of things. One, we know that if you just look at similar types of businesses, you know, sort of the Walmart or the Costco, obviously Costco pays a lot more, but it also has more productive workers, more sales per employee, because you've got less turnover, more investment in the work. And then we've also done some studies at Demos looking at, okay, across the entire low-wage retail sector, what would this do to jobs if we raise the floor to $12.25 an hour? And we found that it would actually create jobs because of the stimulative effect of having more low-wage workers with more money in their pockets to spend.
The idea that this is going to create jobs, and there have been a couple studies out there, the way they get that is you could plug a $40 or $50 minimum wage into that same model.
But that's the thing.
So if you look at, no, it's not, because you know, a couple years ago, we were talking about $8 or $7.25. Now we're talking about $15, and it continues to creep up. We've talked about 22 with Senator Elizabeth Warren. If you look at the research on this over the last 20 years, with a couple of exceptions, and some studies like the Card-Kruger study that have been debunked, the vast majority of economic...
Debunked by who? But I have to ask you this
David
question.
Newmark.
Hold on a second.
The vast majority of economic research shows that raising the minimum wage does cause employment loss, and that's something
I suspect those are probably Heritage Foundation studies, but I do want to ask you this question, because when you just look at the empirical evidence and look at states with higher minimum wage versus states with lower wages, the poverty rate in a state like Mississippi or Alabama is considerably higher than in a state like Illinois or New York. You look at a state like Massachusetts that has a higher minimum wage. You have higher standards of living. You have lower rates of poverty. I mean, there is a pretty straight line kind of direct connection between having higher wages and lower rates of poverty,
and
right?
I think it's really important to look at where this money is, right? We're talking about this in a vacuum. The fact is, we did a report at Demos looking at just Walmart. If they spent the money that they spent buying back their own shares of stock in the market, right, which is something that has been increasingly done by big corporations sitting on a lot of cash, not wanting to invest in their workforce and wanting to pad sort of executive pay and give dividends back to their shareholders, they could have raised the wage of their lowest paid employees by nearly $6 an hour. In just 1 year of what they're doing, basically sort of financializing instead of investing in the productivity of their own workers.
52% of the minimum wage workforce is small businesses.
One of the towns that actually did raise the minimum wage, SeaTac, this small little town outside of Seattle. One of the lead campaigners against raising that to $15 an hour there was the owner of this hotel called the Cedarbrook Lounge. And he said, I'm going to have to lay off workers. He went to every single council meeting and complained and said, this is what's going to happen. After they passed the law and they counted the ballots, he announced a $16 million expansion of his business. He's going to break new ground, hire new construction workers, hire new hotel workers. So, you know, both anecdotally and in the studies that Heather has looked at and cited, you don't see job loss. What you see is some wage compression at the top. You might see some organizational efficiency. You might see some small price increases. That is what the vast majority of economic studies have suggested happen when you raise the minimum wage.